Just to get started, I want to first of all thank Ali, Fahad, and the Park Launch team for arranging these conversations. It's my honor and a great privilege to welcome everyone to what should be a very engaging conversation, hopefully with the poster child of not only the Pakistani ecosystem, but frankly, in my opinion, at least broadly, the MENAP region, as it's being called. The one and only Mr. MUDASSIR Sheikha, co-founder of Kareem, but with a lot of history before that. Thank you for joining us, MUDASSIR.
Thanks for having me, Ravi. Look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. I'm going to get straight into it. The format today that we're going to have is I have a few questions, and I'm just going to walk through those, but we have a lot of people joining in who might also just feed in their questions as well. So I'll try to keep my bit for maybe 30, 35 minutes and then share some of the questions from the audience. And then we can wrap it up at the end. If that works for you, we can get started.
Sure, works.
Excellent. So MUDASSIR, I want to really start from the very beginning, Karachi, and just talk about a little bit about your journey from there. We know about the Maiman community having created many entrepreneurs over the years, but was that like something of an ambition from the start? Did you become an accidental entrepreneur? Were there any inspirations right from the beginning that led you to the journey that you had?
Yeah, look, I think growing up in a community of relatively large, but many, small businesses. My dad had a shop in Jodia Bazaar, so relatively humble business. So definitely I saw a lot of people doing their own businesses, but frankly, my parents were not a fan of me getting into business. They felt I should study, get a job, and join some multinational. And that's the way they expected things to pan out, which is why they focused on education early on and made sure that I was studying hard and going to college, which was not something that my parents were able to do. But where things changed a little bit was I found myself in California at the height of the dot-com bubble, studied computer science in college. And as soon as I graduated, even though I tried working at multinationals, but somehow the flavor of the day was joining a technology startup, and ended up joining a startup that had raised a ton of money at the height of the dot-com bubble. Saw how exciting and crazy these things were. Of course, I lost a lot of money because this was just the wrong time to do a startup, but learned a lot of things in the process. And yes, learned some things to do, but learned many things not to do. But it just felt interesting and felt like it can be done. And if it's done with the right people, with the right values, it can be gratifying and impactful. So that's really how I found myself in an entrepreneur's shoes versus joining a multinational and becoming a professional like my parents wanted me to become.
So that's interesting that you felt that maybe multinationals was not the right, not the way for you to go, but yet you found yourself at a storied firm like McKinsey. So two questions around that. One is how did the move towards closer to Pakistan or to the region get prompted? And secondly, from there, of course, having had success at McKinsey as well, the move away from a firm like that can also be considered a very risky move. I presume when you were having that conversation with your parents, or maybe you did not have that conversation, they might have suggested, please continue doing what you've been doing because it's been working. So was that a risky decision? It was, of course, a risky decision, but wasn't an easy decision to make. Was there really a framework that you followed to come to that conclusion that that's what you wanted to do?
So look, I think the decision to join McKinsey and move closer to home was a relative simple one. One, I'm the only son, parents were getting old, they were in Pakistan. And like most of the people, I promised my parents I'd come back after I complete my education. So I just overstayed in the US for a bit. And the opportunity at McKinsey came up along the same time that I was thinking, maybe I should go and get a business degree because I had studied computer science in college. I'd studied economics as well, but computer science is what I pursued. And I felt that there was something lacking. So when the opportunity to join McKinsey in Dubai showed up, it checked both of those boxes. It checked the box of being closer to home. Ideally, home would have been Karachi, but Dubai wasn't far enough. And secondly, it also seemed like something that I could learn something about business from. And someone told me that, look, instead of going to these business schools, you should just join one of these consulting companies. You actually get paid to study business. So that was the reason why McKinsey, especially in Dubai, made sense. And to leave McKinsey, and McKinsey for many people that join most of these consulting firms, you also join with a 2-year horizon. Most people come in thinking that they'll stay for 2 years and then they'll go and do something else. So I'd come with the same ambition. I'll stay here for 2 years and then I'll go back to Pakistan and do something in Pakistan with my parents. But 2 years became 4 years, and I was getting the entrepreneurial itch back. Like, had done startups all my life before joining McKinsey. It felt a little bit different. And in 2011, which is a year before we started Kareem, 2 things happened. One is Magnus, my co-founder, partner in crime. We were together at McKinsey. He has a brain bleeding, which almost takes his life. He's basically told at the age of 30 that this thing that has happened in his brain has to be treated, and there's a 15% chance that he's not going to survive the surgery. So he goes through that life-ending scenario, promises himself that if he survives, he'll call himself Magnus 2.0 and build something big, and more importantly, build something meaningful that will be his legacy on the planet. So that's happened to him. He came back from the surgery, told McKinsey, thank you very much for paying my hospital bills, but my purpose in life is to be Magnus 2.0, build something big, build something meaningful. And around the same time, and a bit closer to home, McKinsey wanted to open an office in Pakistan. This was one of the things that they'd been wanting to do for a while. I was part of a team that was assigned the task to scope out Pakistan. And when consulting company goes to a new country, they have to look for clients. I made a list of all the large companies in Pakistan at that time. The simplest way to do it was to go to the Karachi Stock Exchange website, make a list of companies, get the market caps. And to my surprise, shocking surprise, and a bit embarrassing surprise, at that time, outside of the PSOs and the PPL and whatever OGDC, there was only one company in Pakistan that was worth $1 billion. That was Angro at that time. That was also just touching $1 billion. And I was often joke around with Magnus, man, I don't know what you guys eat for breakfast in Sweden, where for a population of 9 million people, you have produced so many large and lasting institutions. But for a nation of 220 million people, we have struggled to produce more than one large institution. So when Magnus came from his surgery and said, I want to build something big and meaningful, it was very easy for me to subscribe to it. I'm like, man, we have the potential to do it. We can do it. And let's just give it a shot and make something happen. So it was just too big of a calling to turn down.
Excellent. That's also a great segue into the question around, so how did that idea of doing something big translate into Kareem, and why this region particularly, why that sector, were there any significance in that decision?
Yeah, so we were consultants, right? So when consultants want to do something, they put a 2x2 matrix and they put some spreadsheets together. So there was no idea. A lot of people start businesses with ideas. We didn't have an idea. We had a desire to build something. So, and the 2 dimensions were, has to become big, it has to be meaningful. And, most meaningful ideas are in the education and the healthcare space, right? So we start with a lot of ideas in the education and healthcare. If we can do things there, of course, they are meaningful. And of course, these are big parts of the economy in this region. So initially we were stumbling on those ideas until one day I go to the head of McKinsey in the Middle East, and I basically say, I want to take a sabbatical. I want to go and find something big and meaningful. And Magnus is doing it with me as well. And he's like, what kind of ideas do you have in mind? I shared with him a couple of ideas that we had on the list. He's like, man, this doesn't make any sense. These are not big enough, or something or the other will come in the way. And he then proposes, hey, have you guys looked at ground transportation? I'm like, what do you mean ground transportation? He's like, man, it's a huge problem for us, especially in places like Saudi. We work with these companies. Every trip that people do, they make them sign a piece of paper. They send us a box full of invoices every month. We have to send these boxes to India to transcribe and bill them to the clients. It's a horrible, horrible experience. I go back to Magnus and say, man, it seems like there's something in ground transportation that we can do. And Magnus's response is, man, have you lost your mind? I get a second chance in life, and you're asking me to do a ground transportation company to move consultants around. Like he completely shut this thing down. I'm like, man, we could get our first client and it's a reputable client that we could build something on, but it didn't meet the meaningful bar for him. Until one day he goes to, I forget the name of the hotel, it's Royal Meridian in Abu Dhabi. There was a limo parked outside. There was a Bengali captain in that limo, Bangladeshi captain in that limo. He goes and speaks to the captain. He's like, man, and before Kareem, they were called drivers, but now we call them captains. But he goes and speaks to the guy and spends a couple of hours with him. He's like, understands everything about him. And Magnus came out of that conversation deeply, deeply touched. He's like, man, this guy, he makes this amount of money, 90% of what he makes, he sends back home to educate his kids, feed his family. He doesn't even have his own room. He doesn't even have his own bed. He gets 8 hours on a bed that is shared with others at different shifts. And the poor guy, he has no idea whether at the end of the month, he's going to get enough money to send back home or survive in Abu Dhabi. He was deeply touched by this captain's story. And at that point, the idea of having a ground transportation business that makes the lives of these captains much better became meaningful. And that's when we said, okay, for this segment, if we can do something for captains, this can be worth it. And that's really how it started. The ambition was to build something big. You start somewhere. Initially, we started with a B2B corporate car service. Our first clients were consulting companies, law firms, accounting firms, anyone that was moving around that needed something professionally reliable to get around. And one thing led to another. On-demand came, this came, that came. So that was just, just happened one after another.
Quite a journey, obviously, from that start. And I'd say maybe arguably Kareem has had the most significant impact on the ecosystem across many dimensions. And I just want to probe a little bit on those dimensions and the impact. And clearly there must have been learnings around that. So let's maybe start with the kind of the tech ecosystem and the fundraising elements of it. Obviously at that time, the region looked different. Now, obviously, it's very exciting to be an entrepreneur in Pakistan, an investor in Pakistan. How was that journey specifically? Was it difficult? Were there any kind of clear learnings?
Yeah, more difficult than I expected, Ravi. Fundraising was extremely challenging. I remember for our first round, we had one term sheet, and even that term sheet, there were three VCs, right? Literally three VCs that you could go to. We went to all of these three VCs. They turned us down. They're like, man, what the hell are you guys doing? This doesn't make any sense. Too small consultants. And we told them, man, this is if you look at the first deck that we put together as well, we talk about, yes, we're starting corporate, we'll do this, we'll do deliveries, we'll do this. Conceptually, as diligent consultants, we have mapped it all out, right? This is what we could be doing for the next 10 years, but this is where you start. But as you said, there was no precedent of large platforms being built. So funding was very difficult. Then there were people that were willing to fund you, but these were sort of not smart investors. These are the kind of people that you take money from, and if you fail, they'll say, paise kha gaya, right? So I think we recognize that these are not the right people to take money from, and all the sort of smart money had said no. Now, one investor changed his mind for some reason and called us back, let's have another look. And then we sort of ended up doing a deal with them. Second round, again, one term sheet. It was very, very difficult to even get that term sheet, right? It was a travel business in Saudi that somehow had the right CEO at that time, ended up just liking us and investing in us. And if that term sheet had fallen apart, we would be nowhere. It wasn't until the third round where we started seeing some traction, because by then the business had grown. We were on the radar of people with private equity backgrounds. We were on the radar of people that were investing in global ride-hailing businesses. And we had also proven ourselves a little bit. So then it became a little bit easier. But funding, extremely difficult. The other bit that was difficult was acquiring talent, right? Getting people to come and work at startups. Today is amazing, right? The best talent that comes out of our colleges actually wants to do startups, right? But previously when we started, everyone was like, my parents wanting me to go to multinational, right? They want to go and work at McKinsey, Goldman, all of these places, but no one wants to work at a startup. In fact, I distinctly remember it was a really, really strong friend in McKinsey that I tried hiring. And, I offered him, I don't know, 5% equity in Kareem at that time, like very early, right? Literally in the first 6 months. And I thought 5% for the first 6 months, man, we've already invested. It's actually very generous, right? By most standards.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, he, does a spreadsheet and comes back and says, no, it doesn't make any sense. I'm like, man, why does it not make any sense? He's like, man, look, the best outcome that can happen is $150 million exit, because that's the best outcome that has happened to date, right? Maktub getting acquired by Yahoo is the best outcome. And if I get this with some dilution, I'm going to make this amount of money as a McKinsey partner director. I can easily make that kind of money in 1 year. Why take the risk? And in the best case, and the chance of that happening is 1%, I'm going to get this. It doesn't make any sense financially. So attracting talent was extremely difficult. We were giving people equity, and equity was like, man, give me 500 dirhams more and take 10,000 shares in equity back. Because there was just no precedent of these kind of things happening in the region. So initially our talent was very humble, Rabi. I think a lot of the people that came in early in Kareem, alhamdulillah, they've done really well, and we're extremely proud of their accomplishments. The people that started in the call center made more than $1 million, right? Because they trusted, they came in, and they became a part of the journey. It wasn't until the first 3 to 4 years of Kareem that we were able to, acquire talent that forms the ranks of Kareem today. So acquiring talent was extremely difficult, and sort of raising money was difficult. Now, to your question on learning, the one learning that, not the learning, but it served us well, and I strongly recommend this to other entrepreneurs. We were lucky that we started with Kareem's purpose. Given that we started with Magnus's journey and my realization that Pakistan has not been able to produce institutions, and we had worked for almost 10, 12 years. So we were relatively comfortable in life, right? So it wasn't like about surviving. In the first literally 6 months of Kareem, we wrote down Kareem's purpose or mission, as they call it. And Kareem's purpose from that day has been to simplify the lives of people and build an awesome organization that inspires. Simplify the lives of people, because lives in our region are full of friction. There's a lot of potential in the region that gets lost and wasted in the daily friction of life. So we want to simplify the lives of people so that people can fulfill their potential and build an awesome organization that inspires, because we felt that functionally simplifying lives is not enough. We need to also build self-confidence and belief that these things can be done. This is something that we wrote in 2012. And frankly, this purpose was the reason and way that we were able to attract other awesome people to join Kareem. Like people, many of them are still with us, right? They were making $500,000 somewhere else. They came and took Kareem jobs at $150,000 with very little expectation on what equity will become, just because they felt that this purpose is worth spending the next 5-10 years of their life with. And these are the people that are still with us. Even after the exit has happened, they've done really well. They're like, man, this purpose is not done. We keep going. So taking the time to invest in thinking through why you're doing it, and then articulating it, and then attracting other people that are attracted by the same purpose, ends up creating incredible alignment and like incredible resilience.
And I presume that, like, obviously you investing in people, which is at that time was certainly and still remains quite a novel idea in Pakistan. As they say in Urdu in Pakistan locally, koi kama ke nahi deta. Yeah, and that's why they don't want to even invest in people. But I don't know a single company in the world that has been successful without its people making it successful. So what did it take? Was it you and Magnus living that mission every day? Was it just kind of like, building hope in those people that, okay, someday we are going to make a difference, so just stick with us until then? Because I presume even in that journey, there were ups and downs, fundraising challenges, as you were saying. So what makes it stick?
Yeah, we were lucky that the impact was very visible. It's very easy in the business that we were doing to see captains benefiting day in, day out by what you're offering, right? It was really gratifying. कैप्टन से साथ बैठ के हलवा पूरियां खाई हैं, चाय पी है, सब कुछ किया है कैप्टन के साथ बैठ के, right? And इन्होंने ही तो हमें business सिखाया. Like, we didn't know anything about the transportation business. They are the ones that taught us what works, what doesn't work, and you were able to see the impact that you were making in their lives very, very closely. So that was very gratifying. That kept you going, and then you could see this thing laddering up, right? You know, many times in Dubai, I would get in a car and people would recognize me, captains. And he captain ne badi achhi baat, I still remember that many things have been said. He's like, it's humbling, right? And it's a huge sense of responsibility. Captain कहता है यार आपकी वजह से, आप लोगों की वजह से हजारों families Pakistan में चल रही हैं because many of the opportunities that you've created. Now, how do you dismiss it, right? You feel a sense of responsibility to keep going, and you feel like, man, this is not a job anymore, right? This is a lot more than that. So alhamdulillah, the work that we were doing and the impact that we were making was very close and hard to ignore, hard to dismiss.
And did that change in any way with the acquisition by Uber?
Yeah, it changed. Yes, it changed with the acquisition, but it also changed with scale, right? You know, as you would expect, man, I'm not able to spend as much time with captains as I was, right? Our leaders are not able to, just because, you know, the business has scaled, and, you know, we're not as close to those constituents, as close to the impact as we were back in the day. So I think scale made it a little bit more difficult, and to some extent, we did a few things that kept some connection going, but frankly, we could have done better on that dimension. We could have done better on the dimension of staying close to our captains. And this is something that we are acutely aware of, and something that we're in the process of fixing. The change is underway. Inshallah, it's going to start happening. So scale was one thing that came in the way. And frankly, scaling is, outside of fundraising and talent, scaling is the toughest thing to do, right? And many startups now, alhamdulillah, are at a point where they have to, you know, face challenging scaling challenges. And I remember, to digress a little bit, I was at a VC conference, and, you know, this was in Dubai. A VC was asked, what kind of help do your startups need, and what kind of help do you offer them? And the traditional thing from VCs, and I'm sure, you know, you hear this as well, was like, man, we open doors, we help them with getting clients, we help them with getting employees, all these things, like the usual stuff, right? And I remember this was after we had just become a unicorn, so we had built some scale. And I'm like, man, I don't need help with any of that stuff. Help me figure out, how do we scale gracefully, right? How do we scale with the right value system? How do we attract the right people? How do we make sure that the same values that we had and the ethos that we had are still intact as we hire like 100 people every month and operate in far-flung parts of the region that we've personally never been to? This thing is hard. This thing is hard, and it actually does take a toll. But to your question, what happened as a result of the Uber deal? Of course, there was a little bit of an exodus that happened, and people did really well, right? Now they don't need to work for the rest of their lives potentially. So it's natural for people to want to take some time off and spend time with their families and go do other things in life or do other businesses in life. So there was one thing that happened there. The other thing that happened was not Uber. COVID happened. Our core business got disrupted heavily, which forced us to scale back dramatically. We had to, you know, reduce our expenses and reduce our headcount and do some pretty tough things. But alhamdulillah, you know, as I look back at the last 2 years, I sincerely believe that we are coming out stronger, because the people that are left behind at Careem are on average more purpose aligned than were before, because these are the people that are still here, right? There's no other reason for them to remain but the sense of responsibility. So that's one thing that's happened. The second thing that's happened is we built a lot of things in the last 2 years. Now you don't see them in Pakistan yet, but if you come to Dubai, open the Careem app, you will see 12 services on the Careem app, right? From groceries to food, to ride hailing, to PCR testing, to cleaning, to peer-to-peer payments, to bill payments. Like, a lot of stuff got built. And we have proven the super app model in Dubai now. We're seeing people using multiple services, ending up engaging on the platform way deeper than we've ever seen before. So alhamdulillah, now we have a way stronger product. than we had before. That is delivering incredible results in a very competitive market like Dubai, which now is the time to go and expand the super app to other parts of the region. So painful times, but the best times are yet to come.
I'm going to come back to what's next for Careem and some of the exciting developments that we're hearing about. But give me maybe a little bit more time on the acquisition itself, because it was such a watershed moment for the entire region. Again, large player coming in, both the decision to get acquired by them rather than approach like an IPO, which again, many would kind of also count as an avenue for a potential exit. And then also some of the decisions immediately afterwards. Please allow me to say this, left a little bit bewilderment in the market as well, like maintaining two brands at the same time. We saw at the beginning, there was this both competition, but also benefit to consumers from lower prices, a lot of supply side guarantees for captains. So how much of that was deliberate to change after the acquisition? In the lead up to it, was it deliberately being maintained like that to avoid any sort of, let's call it, reduction in growth or a lowering of scale? So just walk us through again, what was those last kind of few steps or the stages of the journey before the acquisition?
Look, there were three approaches that were made at different points in the last in the years leading up to the acquisition. The first approach was, we don't need Careem, we just don't want competition, and let's do something together so that we can rationalize the market. Second approach was, let's do something together. Maybe you guys lead the combined thing in the region, but we still don't need two platforms. When Dara took over, there was a very clear shift in approach. When we were approached, our response was, the reason we are doing this is Careem's purpose. That was the why from the beginning, to simplify the lives of people and build an awesome organization that inspires. On that purpose, we're still extremely early. There are 500 million people that live between Morocco and Pakistan. We're simplifying the lives of a handful of million on any given month. So there's still 100 times more people that we want to impact, that we need to impact in more ways than just mobility, because mobility is just one part of people's lives. There are many other ways that you can impact. So on the purpose, we were not done. And one thing led to another. We negotiate the right to remain independent and sort of keep building, because super app at that time was a concept. We had taken some steps to become super app. And Dara was very, very supportive. Uber basically said, look, they believe that the opportunity in the region is large. What has been built can become something bigger. And we'll keep Careem independent and let Careem do what it is doing, pursue the super app vision, but Uber will focus on mobility largely for the region. So the deal was done on that basis. There was still some, you talked about the IPO, of course, as leading up to it. This was a consideration. Should we, because for us, Careem, you start getting attached to what you build, right? It's like a baby. It literally is like a baby. It becomes your kid. So it is emotional, and you don't want to do something that will risk your baby getting absorbed or disappearing, which happens a lot in acquisitions. So IPO was definitely a more attractive route from that perspective. And at that time, even though no tech IPOs had happened, the region wanted to do tech IPOs. We were approached by some regional exchanges with promises to help support the IPO process for Careem. But one investor, an American investor, he was very, very clear that rejecting this deal and not doing this would be very selfish on your part. He said the region needs a massive exit, and this exit could ignite the ecosystem. So if you decide not to accept it, know that you're actually being selfish in looking out for things that matter more to you than may matter to the ecosystem. And at that point, since the region was a big part of Careem's purpose in the first place, man, we're like, man, we're getting the right to remain independent. Hopefully we can keep delivering to justify the independence. Investors are getting an exit, ecosystem is getting an exit. We get to continue driving this thing. Seems like we're getting our cake and eating it too. Why not do it? So that's really what led up to the decision of this thing. Your question on incentives and things of that sort, as you probably know, man, the business was losing a ton of money. Yeah. And that wasn't a sustainable way to run the business. So at some point, it had to be rationalized. And frankly, the nail on the coffin wasn't the deal with Uber. The nail on the coffin was COVID, right? Business went down 90%. The old way of running a ride-hailing business was just not going to cut it, right? Now, alhamdulillah, the business has become more sustainable. And what we're doing with the super app, at least in Dubai, we do see that the cost of acquisition is lower. The lifetime value is much, much higher. So we have a more efficient platform that can operate with lower margins than was possible before. So in some ways, the fact that we've diversified our offerings and offering more things in one platform allows us to be leaner and give more back to the constituents that are providing the service on the platform.
So where is Kareem now? And how should we think about what's next? Obviously, there's some developments that we know are taking place, but how is it positioned? How do you see this kind of continuing? Does it reshape itself? And did that decision at that time to maintain that independence create this opportunity? Otherwise, it might not have been possible.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I think this opportunity is there from that decision. And frankly, Junaid Jamshed had a very interesting video. I tried looking for it. I did not find it. In that video, he used to say that, man, if your intention is right, then, Allah is your partner in that journey. And alhamdulillah, man, many of these things have just happened in Kareem. And this thing is happening pretty interesting as well. But just to give you a sense of where we are, if you look at digital adoption in the region, and at the very, very sort of macro picture, right? Digital adoption in the region overall used to be at 3% a couple of years ago. As a result of COVID, it's gone up to 6%. It's slightly lower than 6%. And Pakistan is probably way lower. This is the average for the region. This is a far cry from what it will be in 3, 4, 5 years from now. Many parts of the world are already 20, 30, 40%. So a lot of people will start doing a lot more things digitally. That spending will grow, digital ecosystem will grow, adoption will grow. If you look at what has happened in other parts of the world when that journey has been taken, you see that a few platforms end up creating outsized impact and value. If you look at the US, probably one of the most vibrant tech ecosystems globally. In fact, it's not even an ecosystem because a lot of the tech companies in the US that target global audiences. But isn't it mind-boggling that 8 platforms in the US, they used to be called FANG, I don't know what they call them now, but there are 8 platforms in the US whose collective value is probably larger than the size of the entire ecosystem in the US. They make up a quarter of the market cap of the index, right? It's just mind-boggling that it has happened in this way. And it's not just US. We look at China, there are 5 platforms that similarly contributed outsized impact and value. Our view is that as we go from, let's say, 6% to 30, 40, 50%, there are some inherent network effects, which despite the increasing activity that we see in this amazing ecosystem, there will be 2 or 3 platforms that will emerge as the ones that create outsized impact and value. And over the next 5 to 10 years, this is what we want to build. The Google of the region, the Amazon of the region, something of that scale and prominence.
And does that come under the Uber umbrella? Or is there some potential different developments that we might see?
Look, it requires some investment. So that investment for that type of value creation is not a challenge. And we'll figure out a way to make it happen.
Excellent. And so putting it all together, how has this entire experience of building out Kareem and seeing this full cycle journey, how has that differed from the expectations you had when you started? And if you put aside the tremendous success that you had, would you be repeating this life journey the same way that you did?
Look, alhamdulillah, we could not have predicted any of this, right? So I think very grateful for all the things that happened out of nowhere that made it happen. the reach of the platform is quite vast, right? From Morocco to Pakistan, so that's incredible, right? When we started we were ambitious, but frankly, we didn't realize that this can become so big so quickly. So the scale has surprised us as well, and the pace at which the scale was built was surprising. So that was one surprise. I had done startups before, Rabil, and Kareem has been a lot more purposeful than any startup or company that I was a part of. And I don't say it, because of what we have built, but really because of the gift of purpose that was given to Kareem at birth from Magnus's inspiration as a result of his experience. Most of us see Kareem as a responsibility. There is no reason to keep doing what we're doing 15, 16-hour days with all the commitments and expectations that your family has on you. But it feels like it's a life's work that hopefully when we are on our way out from this world, we look back and say, look, this was a life worth living and giving. So it's been a lot more purposeful than I expected. And it becomes more and more as we sort of grow and do more things. So that's the second surprise. And third, man, it's been challenging as well.
I'm sure.
You're naive as an entrepreneur, which is great, right? Which makes you jump and take the plunge and wanting to do these things, but it's tough. It's tough on the personal front. It's tough emotionally, tougher than you expect, but gratifying at the same time.
What would you do differently?
There are things, and let me try to make it practical for the ecosystem, right? Because where the ecosystem is, I do think one should be a little bit more careful in selecting investors that come on board, because a lot of times investors are not very involved in the business, but they do get involved when the most strategic decisions need to be made, right? And just like when you're hiring people, you are assessing them on values and purpose alignment, all of the things that you do to make sure that someone is a culture fit. But when you're bringing investors on board, there is no culture fit, right? No purpose alignment, no values alignment that is done, which feels so wrong, right? These are the people that will be responsible for some of the most strategic decisions that the organization will end up making. And you have not done anything to test them on purpose and values alignment. And this decision is more irreversible than anything else, because you can fire people that you hire, but you cannot fire investors once they are sitting on the board and on the cap table, right? You're just wedded to them. So one advice to entrepreneurs is, don't just chase the valuation and terms, man, understand who you're bringing on board. And maybe it won't matter, but it will matter when you really need it to matter. So this is one. Yeah, so it is one thing that, I strongly suggest people take a slightly more holistic view on the topic than just looking at simple headline terms. That's one thing. And second, it's all about people, right? Get awesome people on board and things start happening. And it's very easy not to focus on culture and values because you're so busy in the act of building the business, in the act of getting customers, in the act of doing the business activities that need to be done, that culture and values become an afterthought. And they need to be a bit more front, right, and center early on. And we had some of it, right? Because we came from organizations that had built very strong culture. So we knew that it had to be done. In fact, on day one of Kareem, before we did anything else, we wrote down the first version of our values. So this was the first act that we did. So we knew the importance of values, but many points in the journey, we were ridiculous a bit. I was trying to hire someone in Saudi, and this person and I spoke for 2 hours, and I spoke a lot about values and culture. He's like, man, what's wrong with you? Like, should you not be just focused on getting the next captain and launching the next city, and you're talking about culture and values? Like, it is a bit, it's not something that people think of enough, right? So, I would also say, focus more on these topics early on, especially as you start scaling. These things become important as you're trying to get new people on board. You want to make sure that these people are doing the same things in the same way that you would do them, because otherwise you'll start going in 10 different directions, and very soon this will become a huge mess that will have difficult outcomes.
My final two questions are actually linked to this very point that you mentioned, which is ultimately like people. What we're experiencing now, both in Pakistan, but also broadly in the region, is like, a little bit of a flurry of like capital coming in, a lot of startups having the capital to spend on acquiring talent, and spending is fairly high. There's also inflationary pressures. How do you, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, how do you test whether there's alignment on those values? Like, when obviously you're also combining it with a very healthy paycheck, and obviously, like, it's easy for young entrepreneurs to get tempted by something that's shiny. So how does one test this?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in it, right? So first, man, I think we need to become a little bit more judicious in how we spend money. And I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs as well. And
I'm glad you're saying it not as a VC, because that's not acceptable these days.
Yeah, but people use the Kareem example. Kareem did this as well. And I'm like, man, look at the history of Kareem. For the first 4 years of Kareem, Kareem had no money, right? Kareem had a $100,000 startup capital. We had a $1.7 million round. We had a $10 million. Like, we had absolutely no money to burn anywhere close to the kind of money that is being burned in the ecosystem right now. And that allowed us to build some PMF, product market fit, before we start investing money and growing, right? But these days I look at startups and they're like, oh, I've just started last week and now my burn is $500 million. Like, really? I don't understand. How could you have built a product and built a product market fit and you're spending that kind of money? And then you're citing examples like Kareem. I'm like, no, this is not how it happened. This is not what you should be doing, right? So anyways, that was just a digression, not the question that you asked, but I had to sort of put this in there because I feel that these habits die hard. That's the problem, right?
That's
it's an addiction, right? And even in the case of Kareem, when we were in that sort of hyper spending mode, when we had a product market fit, when we were scaling and growing, and there were times where we were not operating in the best way possible when it came to spending money, the people that joined the journey at that time, man, they didn't learn many of the right things. And when they've gone other places, they're also bringing the same habits out, right? So, you want to build a culture where some of these things are a bit more ingrained, which brings me to the next question that you're asking. If this is important to you, if this is important to your business, you need to embed this in the value. So at Kareem, we have a value: be frugal. And we remind ourselves and remind our people every day that we have a responsibility to be frugal, not just because it's the right thing to do and you want to build a sustainable organization, but in our part of the world, if you're not frugal, you're not going to be able to serve the masses on a sustainable basis. I'll give you Kareem's example, but I'm sure the same applies to most other startups in Pakistan. What's the cheapest service that we have on the Kareem Super App today? It's the motorbike service in Pakistan. It's the cheapest service that we have in the Kareem Super App today. Bike is offering that service as well. What's the average cost of the service? 70 cents. On a good day, now we charge 15%. Earlier we were charging 20%, but let's use 20% to keep the math simple. 20% of 70 cents is 14 cents. How much do we pay AWS for hosting our data centers? 5 cents a trip. It's a dollar denominated cost. 14 minus 5, 9. How much do we pay Google?
Pinging Google repeatedly.
How much do we pay Google? Navigation, maps, 3 cents. 9 minus 3, 6 cents. How much do we pay for other systems that are monitoring our things, blah, blah? 2 cents. Left with 4 cents. SMS, this, that, 1 cent, 3 cents. This is even before we count most of the direct costs of serving that trip. The captain, support for the captain, the acquisition of that captain, all that stuff. Man, we live in a market that has low purchasing power. Most of our costs are dollar denominated. If we are not frugal, we're not going to be able to serve the masses in our region sustainably. Jab tak VC paisa aa raha hai, ho jayega, but as soon as that dries up, which it will dry up sooner or later, this is not a thing that keeps on happening, right? Then not only are you going to be toast, but you're not building any platform to serve the masses in our region. So frugality has to be embedded deeply in the DNA. Man, look at Walmart. I don't know if you read the book, it's Made in America, fantastic book. I highly recommend to everyone. Even after Walmart became super successful, when Sam Walton would travel with his executives, he would share the hotel room with his executives, right? He's like, man, the money that we save for that hotel room is actually going to result in lower prices to customers, right? That's the DNA that we, especially in Pakistan, where the purchase power is low, need to have, right? And at the moment, we're seeing completely opposite, right? So this needs to start shifting quite radically in a different direction. And if you don't do it, then there will be some explosions. It's just a matter of time. Now, how do you test on values, which was your question before I went on my rant? Yeah, it's not difficult, right? And if you know what the values are, in our case, there are 3 core values: to the moon and beyond, which is about super ambitious; being of service, which is wanting to give back; and ownership. Come up with a bunch of questions. You test people on them, right? What have you done in the past that tells me that you are super ambitious? And then you don't take the answer, right? You grill and test it. What have you done that makes me demonstrates that you have a mindset of giving back, you just want to serve others, you test. You'll make mistakes even after this testing, after this grilling. And when you make mistakes, you have to act fast, right? So, they say, right, hire slow, fire fast. Easier said than done. We've not always done it, but every time we've done it, we realize that we should have done it earlier.
And that clearly has worked in some cases, because we keep talking about the Kareem mafia in the region. And I have a question around that. Like, what's the secret sauce there? Is it a mindset? Is it just the experience of seeing a startup go full cycle in the region? What exactly is it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you probably have a perspective that is stronger than mine on this. But just from the trenches, there are probably 2 or 3 things that potentially came together. One is people created some financial cushion for themselves. It may not have been a huge cushion, but there was you also need some margin of safety to take risks, right? So I think that happened through the exit. People made some money that got them a little bit bolder in their approach. So that's one. Second, and this I heard from a VC in Saudi last week, he said somehow the people that he has interacted with from Careem, they're just more ambitious. And surprisingly, that match with our top value at Careem, to the moon and beyond. So in that value, we do talk about thinking and acting big. You have unlimited potential, and there's a lot of focus on shooting for the moon, thinking big, acting big. You have a lot of potential. You're shortchanging your potential if you're not thinking big. So I think there's a little bit of that. Maybe people did take that with them, and the fact that Kareem was able to achieve some of these things probably gave them confidence that it can be done if they shoot for the moon. So that was maybe the second thing. And third, you realize that people that are doing these things are no different than you and I, right? You build confidence, and you also see the mistakes that they're making, and you make the same mistakes. And, Steve Jobs had an interesting saying, which he said, man, when you look at the world from a lens, that everything that you are using, whether it is a computer, whether it is this thing, they were all created by people that are not necessarily as smart as you or as smarter than you. Then all of a sudden, everything in the world looks possible, right? So I think being able to look at that more closely probably gives you confidence. But anyways, what's your perspective? I'd love to get your view on this as well.
Well, the first thing that we notice is that everyone likes to also play off of Kareem's success. So the first thing that we have to figure out as VCs is who really played what role, because obviously if success has 1,000 fathers. So that's one element that we see. But I think it's really the point that you mentioned, which is instilling that notion in entrepreneurs that you can dream big. And if you act on it and take the right steps, they don't always have to be right, but adjust along the way, you can achieve big outcomes. And I think that's it's like up the starting level for many of the entrepreneurs in the region. So we now see that ambition being much bigger. elements like having values, both not just thought through, but also like documented. We see a lot more commonly now. And I think those are like, some of the common traits we've seen from former Careem employees who now are onto very big things themselves. So that's my perspective on what it is. So I think ultimately it comes down to a mindset, but seeing that mindset being implemented in a very good way that Careem demonstrated.
Thank you.
I'm going to come back. There's lots of questions, like, my chat here is like exploding with questions that people have submitted. So I'm going to try to, like, again, cover maybe a couple that are like, again, like asking you, what's next for MUDASSIR SHEIKHA? Is it we continue to build Careem, meaning you're just an entrepreneur truly at heart, but you're also investing in now startups? So is it a combination of an investor plus entrepreneur? Or is it now to kind of like, again, steady the ship, or like, to give it a shape that you would want to see for the next 10, 20 plus years potentially?
So Careem remains my day job, and more than my day job, still extremely busy building Careem. And like I said, Rabi, it's still super early in the journey. The next decade is crucial. There was a tweet that someone sent me the other day that most big companies, they achieved the most in their second decade. So Careem is going to enter its second decade in July this year. So a lot to be done. And at the end of it, inshallah, we'll have one of the largest platforms from the region with the highest impact and highest value created. And for that, a lot needs to be done. We have built some products. These products need to be built a bit more. We need to expand these products to other markets. But more importantly, we also need to institutionalize Careem, the institution. The last 2 years were difficult for Careem. We were a little bit on the defense as a result of COVID, as a result of the deal with Uber. We are coming out and starting to play offense once again. So there is some change of gears that is happening in Careem as we speak as well. For me personally, outside of Careem, there isn't too much time. I write all angel checks, as you know. So largely driven by people. Why are they doing what they're doing? And people don't like that term, but I have a spray and pray type of mindset. If my small check can be a catalyst for other people to write bigger checks, that's fantastic. I don't care about losing that money, frankly, but any money that is invested in the ecosystem today, as long as it's given to the right people, even if it doesn't create successes, it'll create learnings and capabilities that will create successes next time or the one time after. But it's important to start investing in the ecosystem to make sure that this capability that gets built and these platforms start to happen.
And we're seeing a lot of that development in the ecosystem, a lot of investor interest, a lot of like operator angels that have also been created off the back of both the Careem's exit and other successes that they've had. How do you see the ecosystem evolving? Are you seeing any pitfalls that are visible to you because you've been in this journey longer than most of us have? And by that an extension to that question is that vantage point different for an entrepreneur versus an investor, looking at maybe talking about the Pakistani ecosystem specifically?
So one pitfall, of course, like I mentioned, is just some spend
lack
discipline.
Of frugality.
Yeah, the spend discipline is one that's very obvious at the moment. Then second is, which is again, we discussed a bit more focus on values and culture, but I think that's happening to some extent. I see more and more people talk about these things early on. So maybe this is no longer red, but already on its way. Third, and this has been a full cycle learning for me and others at Careem, focus on product versus operations. Operations don't scale. Operations are very difficult to keep consistent as you scale. The more you can invest in technology, the more you can invest in product to solve problems, the more scalable, the more gracefully you will scale. And of course, we have a shortage of tech talent in Pakistan. So I know it's hard, but until we crack it, we are going to be vulnerable. from other entrants that will come from outside, that will take a more tech and product approach to some of the things that need to be done. So I would say become a little bit more product-led versus operations-led is one learning. Yeah, I think those are the first things that come to mind. I think otherwise the ecosystem is on fire. It's great to see what's happening, and we have a responsibility to fuel it.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would add to what you shared is like maybe play the long game, as demonstrated by yourself, and how Kareem has evolved, and like, you know, hopefully will continue to evolve over time, because I think the avenues for short-term quick wins are few and far between, and most people unfortunately crash in that purpose.
No, that's a great point. I think play the long game. Never have a build to flip mindset. If you have that mindset, then most likely, you know, you'll be vulnerable to bad things happening, and you won't have the sort of resilience to withstand. If you play the long game, you're going to be in much better shape. And we must play the long game, right? We're so much to deliver over the next couple of decades, so there's no option but to play the long game.
Excellent. There's way too many questions. We could go on for like, you know, a few more hours, but also obviously very conscious of your time, and for everyone who has tuned in. I do really want to thank you for giving us time and like, you know, sharing your learnings. It's rare to have an opportunity like this. For me personally, it was an honor to be able to do this. But I do have a very interesting question from someone who submitted. When inevitably, inshallah, a movie gets made on Kareem or MUDASSIR Sheikha, who does MUDASSIR want to play him?
Sorry, a movie?
So the question is, when a movie gets made on Kareem, who do you want to play you? Or is that not a relevant question for MUDASSIR?
I have no idea, man. I don't even know who the actors are and people are these days. So, but hopefully the movie is made on Kareem and it's not MUDASSIR singled out. So it's one of the characters versus the lead character.
There you go. We'll go with Fawaz Khan. Okay. Yeah. I just want to, again, leave it to you for any final parting comments. There are investors, entrepreneurs, ecosystem stakeholders, all joined in on Zoom, on Facebook. So anything that you'd want to share? Obviously, we've picked up on many of the lessons about frugality, about picking investors wisely, playing the long game, etc. But any parting words?
The most profound impact on Kareem's journey has been the purpose that we started with. And as you mentioned, Rabil, that is what has given us the ability and the drive to play the long game. So if you haven't figured out your purpose yet, or why you're doing what you're doing, it may be worthwhile taking a step back and penning something down, and then making sure that you can stay true to it, and then use it to sort of attract other people that are driven by the same things. And even if you don't believe in this thing 200% at first, you will start getting close to it if you keep practicing it, and this will become the source of you playing the long game over time, inshallah.
Thank you so much for your time, MUDASSIR. It was a pleasure to hear from you, and I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone who's tuned in and many millions others. We wish Kareem all the best and wish you much more success in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.